So the word Jezreel, well, first of all, just if you'd allow me just a little bit of geek stuff, Jezreel is a valley. It is not only is it the valley of Jezreel, but it is the valley of Armageddon. Isn't that interesting? But it is also a city, and it is the place where Jehu actually killed a whole dynasty of the kings, and that's where Ahab was at, and just a lot of things went on in Jezreel. But here, this is a literal place in a literal city in a literal valley. But here, God chooses to use the word not as a city or a valley per se, but as a picture, really. But the word means God will scatter. And the wordplay is really interesting to me because in first chapter, it's kind of the negative side of it, but he's using the word Jezreel as God's going to scatter Israel, as in they're no longer going to be together; they're going to be scattered out. I'm going to disperse them, and they're going to be forsaken, and they're not going to be my people. And so a wordplay on, but the interesting, took me just a minute to figure this out, but the exact same thing in chapter 2, he speaks about Jezreel, and when he says to scatter, he means to sow grain. And that was fascinating to me. It's the exact same word and exact same meaning in the Hebrew, exact same word, but one is to scatter to get rid of them, and the other is to scatter to sow for their benefit. So we're going to look at this just a little bit because I think it's just interesting. I hope it'll be interesting to somebody besides me. But Jezreel as punishment. So as we look at chapter 1, we know, if you're familiar with the book, Hosea goes and marries Gomer, and they begin to have children, and it is just a picture of the relationship of God with Israel. But the first son they named him Jezreel, and that Jezreel is a curse that he's going to avenge the blood of Jehu on them, and they will cease to. And it will come to pass, I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. So it's a curse on them. He goes on, not only is there that curse of if you will, of war, but then there is the curse of the second son, for I will no more have mercy upon you. Verse number 6, however you say that name, Lurama, I will no more have mercy upon the house of Israel. And then we get to the third son in verse number 8, Lo Haram, and for you shall not be my people, and I will not be your God. So Jezreel, the first child, starts off to be a curse. God's going to scatter them. God's going to allow them to be overcome by their enemy. God's going to no longer have mercy on them. God's going to no longer call them his people. He's turning them away. He's scattering them. And God's going to bring them to poverty. He's going to have the consequences of sinning against God. So we see a real clear picture here that Israel has sinned. This is getting kind of more towards, if you read in verse 1, it tells kind of the time frame it is getting more towards the end of the kings. And Israel got very evil. They got wrapped up into idolatry. And because of that, this curse is coming upon them. Interestingly, we come to chapter 2, after all of these curses are pronounced upon them, we come to chapter 2, and God is going to turn it around and make it a blessing. So Jezreel as a blessing. Am I making any sense whatsoever to anybody? the same word is having a dual meaning, and in Hosea here, it's actually God making the story, but is drawing a picture of what happens when you disobey God and what happens when you obey God, and using the same word to teach that lesson. I don't know. It was interesting to me. Jezreel as a blessing. So The first one was to scatter them, to disperse them, to to bring great harm to them. The second Jezreel is to sow seed. And so the sowing of the seed brings forth produce. Now, in the Old Testament, Israel, the Bible's kind of written more. They needed natural help. They needed their crops. They needed protection from the enemy. They needed a lot of things they got from God. Their blessings were material things. That's kind of the way the Old Testament it reads. We know that in the New Testament we are more in need of a spiritual blessing, right? But they needed produce. They needed food. Don't we need food, right? We need food. And so God's going to, in chapter 1, he's taking away the food. In chapter 2, he's giving back the food. He says, I'm going to sow it. But then it's something that really kind of caught my mind about this. I know we have some gardeners in the church, but sowing takes time to harvest. Isn't that true? And this kind of really drew a picture to me, even in a spiritual realm. But God is saying, I'm going to sow, but it's not always instant. Isn't that true? It's not always just instant. In other words, you don't put seed in the ground and go back out and, corn's ready, let's eat it. It takes time. So God is doing the sowing. He's scattering seed, but it takes time for the produce to come from that. And I thought this was interesting. I'm not even sure what it means, but in verse 22, at the end of 22, it actually says, "They shall hear Jezreel." That is Israel. In this text, he is calling Israel Jezreel. I just thought that was interesting. He's all this wordplay he has of scattering, and then he says that I will hear Jezreel in verse 22. And it's kind of an interesting thing if you follow it through. Again, it's kind of poetic language, and it's kind of interesting, at least to me. But if you read those verses there that we read, 21, 22, 23, something, it's kind of like the earth is crying out to the seed, and the seed is crying out to the heavens, and the heavens are crying out to God. And it kind of gives this picture of all of these things that we don't normally think about talking are talking, right? The seeds are talking, and the crops are talking, and the ground is talking, and the heavens are talking. And it's poetic language, just trying to show the picture of God is going to give them the food that they need. I think it's a little bit hard for us to relate to this story because living in America, we have Walmart, right? And we have Burger King, and we have, we very, very seldom are we ever going to say, I don't know where I would go to get any food, right? But they lived in an agricultural time, and literally if the ground didn't produce, they were going to starve. There were no stores to go to, or there were no restaurants. There was nothing. And so the only hope they had was that the ground would produce fruit. So the interesting thing about that is man can put seed in the ground, but can man produce crops? Nope. So, and in Israel in particular, they were really dependent upon the early and latter rains. It's kind of how their agriculture worked. But if they went out and sowed and God didn't bless it, they were going to starve to death. And so that is a seriousness. It's serious to think about not having any food. And then God steps in and he says, I am going to sow the seed, and I am going to make it grow. And so, again, I don't know if we completely appreciate how serious that is. But then I wanted to look at, I kind of think this is the crux of the point here. But in verse 16, and it shall be at the last day, saith the Lord, that thou shalt call me Ishi, and shalt call me no more Bali. So Ishi is translated from the Hebrew is husband. You shall call me husband. But Bali is the word master in the Hebrew. And so do you see the picture here? I think this is really significant. If I can get this across to you, all this geek stuff, I'm afraid I'm losing you guys. He says, you've been calling me master. You're not going to call me master anymore. You're going to call me husband. And I think if we really get down to what is going on here, God is saying, I want you to serve me because you love me. I want you to have a relationship with me. I want you to do it because you care about me and you are concerned about me, and not just because that I'm some master that is going to, give you a consequence if you don't do what I say. Isn't there a huge difference even in today? I think he's drawn this picture of what's going to happen in the New Testament. But isn't there a huge difference today between serving a master and serving the one we love? There's a huge difference. And I really think that speaks so much to Christianity. We'll get into it here in a minute, but I think that speaks so much to Christianity even today that I think still we get caught up in. Now, does the New Testament teach that God is to be our master? Yeah, it does. But I think we have lost in that the love relationship, and now it is, if I don't do this, God's going to do something bad to me. And so God is literally coming to them in chapter 2 and saying, I don't want that relationship with you anymore. I want a different relationship with you. And if you'll do that, I will give you all these blessings. I will sow and not reap. Now, another little interesting play on words, and I read a whole bunch of commentaries and smart people about it and everything, but the word Beli is translated master, but they had somehow that word had become Balaam to them. And we know that they had a real problem worshiping idols, and Balaam being one of the things that they worshipped. And so God, so you kind of see the picture, if I can draw this out to you. They start out serving Jehovah as master, and then they got off track and started worshiping idols because they were worshiping a master. Does that register at all with anybody? Had they been loving God for who he is, maybe they would have never gotten tangled up in worshiping an idol. And if you're familiar with your Old Testament, if you're familiar with the whole history of the Old Testament, Israel struggled nearly their entire existence worshiping idols. That was just, they just seemed like they could not. God would chastise them, God would punish them, and they would go right back to idols just every time, go right back to idols, right back to idols, right back to idols. But God finally, when he carried them away to Babylon, and they went through the captivity and the exile and all that, they finally were broke from worshiping idols. Isn't that interesting? That's fascinating to me that for hundreds and hundreds of years they could not quit worshiping idols. And they finally did come to a place to stop worshiping idols. So Ishi is a husband. It's a love relationship. So let's just look just a little bit at the difference. We've been talking about this a lot lately. Seems like having that love relationship with God. But let's just look a little bit at what that looks like. We discussed this in Bible study this week, but how much better is it, and I think this is one of the big keys to what's going on at Sandhill right now, how much better is it for you to study the Bible for yourself, and for you to understand what it means, and for you to come up with the right interpretation, and for you to understand what your God wants you to do? As opposed to coming to church and I tell you what it says and I study it for you and I give you the interpretation and I give you what you're supposed to do and I tell you this is how you're supposed to live. Do we see the huge difference there? Do you guys see that? And I really think in churches, I think so many times in churches we can be guilty of, the preacher has all the answers and you guys don't need to study and I'll just tell you what to believe and don't believe anything that I don't believe and you got to do what I say and I'm going to tell you what you can wear and what you can't wear and where you can go, what you can't do and I'm going to make all these rules. And if everybody just does what I say and believes what I believe, you'll all be good Christians. Do we see that in churches? Yeah, we see that in churches a lot. And the funny thing about that is, to me, the fascinating thing about that is most people in the pews will gladly go along with that. They will gladly just be told what to believe, what to do. But here's the problem. You're cutting the relationship out of it. You're doing what the church tells you. You're doing what the preacher tells you. You are not having a relationship with the Lord. And even here at Sandhill, and I think we're getting away from it, but I think that there are still many of you that would just be happy if I would just say, do this, but don't do that. And you say, Pastor, I want to know what God wants. You just tell me what it is and I will do it. But you know what you really need to do? You need to have a relationship with Him, and you're doing what He says because of the relationship with Him. And it is a little bit confusing when you do what man tells you to do and you don't have a relationship of your own, and you go to this church and they have this, and this, and this you got to do, and that's your relationship with God because the preacher told you to. But then you go to another church and they don't do that. They do something else. And now and now your Christianity, see, it shouldn't change by the preacher. It should be you and God. Am I making sense to anybody? Does this make sense? It's you and God. And if you study the Bible for yourself and you understand the Bible for yourself, it will talk to you. Anybody know that? It will talk to you. And I'm always thrilled to be able to help, and I'm always thrilled to try to understand everything, but I see such a change in the church, especially those who are studying the Bible, because they're learning it for themselves, they're studying it for themselves, and they are deciding what God wants them to do, not what Gary wants them to do. I think that is worlds different, and I'll try to be nice when I say this, but is it not dangerous that you can come to church and the preacher tell you what to believe and what to think and how to live and everything else, and maybe you do exactly what he says and you miss Jesus and don't go to heaven? And I just think that is really, really common. And I think in the generation we're in now, and in the time that we're in now today, I think a lot of that is, a lot of people just don't want anybody to tell them what to do or whatever. But I think in years gone by, that was very, very common in almost all churches, to come to church, you don't think, you don't do anything, we will tell you what to believe, we'll tell you how to live, we'll tell you everything. You have no relationship, you just do what we tell you to. And eternity will let us know, but I just wonder how many people sat in the pew and did exactly what the preacher said, but they were never saved. And they didn't go to heaven because they did what man told them to do. And so this is what I think is being addressed here in this what Jesus, or what the Lord is giving us here in this story. Israel was not in a love relationship. They were in a master servant relationship, and they just gotten completely off course. And so not only do we want to study the Word for ourselves and have that relationship with the Spirit telling us what to do, but I've been saying this so much lately, but I just want to make sure that we really understand it. Do we really get what it is to have a love relationship with God? Because if you really love Him, the rest of the Bible is really not going to be a problem. And I think again, some people are going to the Bible trying to figure out, where's the list of rules that I need to keep? And what we're supposed to be doing is going to the Bible to learn about God, so we can have a relationship with Him, and then we won't have to worry about the commandments. Will just keep themselves. We've been learning that in Sunday school as well, but I struggle with how to really describe this, but let me try this out. If you really, really love the Lord, you won't want anything, even the most minute thing in your life, that would displease Him. And that's not how I see most Christians living. I see an awful lot of people saying, Even when they come in to hear preaching, they come in to hear preaching and they're like, they put up the subject and it's like, well, Pastor, if I don't do that, does that mean I'm not going to be saved? Or do I have to do that? Or is that, and it's like, there's not really that I want to make sure everything in my life is pleasing to God. There's just how much can I not do and still be a Christian? How much can I get by with and still be a Christian? I remember this. I know I've told this illustration before, but this has been a long time ago, so don't try and think of who it was. But I got this phone call from this lady, and her husband was flirting with another girl, messing around with another girl, and she found out about it. And so she calls me up, and I know this person quite well. And now this person's not going to church. They're not. There's a whole long list of things that they're doing that's very, very sinful. But this is what she says. She's mad at her husband now. You got to think. She's mad at her husband. And she says, Pastor, do you think if I divorce him, I'll go to hell? And what she was saying is all of those other violations I have, they really don't matter. But if I do the big one, I'm going to go to hell. And it just really spoke volumes to me, as that's how so many Christians live. It's like there's so many violations, there's so many things in your life that are wrong, there's so many things you do, and then you hear a preacher saying, "But well, do I really have to give that up? Am I gonna? If I don't do that, am I not a good Christian?" And it's like it ought to be turned around, and we ought to be coming to church saying, "I want to get just as close to His feet as I can. I want to live as close to Him as I can. I want to know everything I can to please Him, and I don't want anything in my life that doesn't please Him." Let me just ask you guys this question. You can answer out loud. How many people do we see living like that? Just, I don't want one thing in my life that displeases God. That is where we ought to be living as Christians. And here's what bothers me, even studying this chapter out. I believe that is what the Christian life is supposed to be. And I don't think it is. I don't think by and large in churches and in congregations and among people, I don't think it's that love relationship where I don't want anything that displeases Him. I think it is more of, I got to go to the altar and I got to do certain things and I hope I make it to heaven. And, what about, and I know we talk about this all the time, but is there anybody here that's afraid to have thoughts that God's not pleased with? Or do we just think, well, that He lets that slide? Or attitudes, or say things we shouldn't? We play real loose with a lot of things, but do we really live in such a way that every word that comes out of my mouth, every thought that I have, everything that I do, I want Jesus to be happy with it? And that's a love relationship. That's how we're supposed to be living. And I think when we do, we will begin to see Jezreel sowing into our life good things. But I fear that in 2025, there's an awful lot of what we call Christian that's not living this way. The relationship had to change before the blessings could come. So Israel was in a very bad relationship with God. They made Him master, then they began to worship idols, and then God brought a curse down on them, and great consequences came to them. And He offers them now, if you will turn back to me in a love relationship, I will bless you. I will take away the sword from you. I will enter into a covenant with you, a loving relationship with you. I will be faithful to you. I will give you crops. And I will be your God. And so, as we look at real quick, if you caught it here, we've already read it. But with the three curses that were in chapter 1, the war and avenging of the military with the first son, and then there'll be no mercy with the second son, and then of the third son, you're not my people. As we go over chapter 2, all those things come back. He said, I'm going to take away the bow, and I'm going to have loving mercy towards you, and the ones that were not my people will be called my people. He gives it all back, and it is key to having that loving relationship. Am I making sense to anybody here? Is anybody getting this? I know it's a lot of wordplay and definitions and all, but I think it really has a good meaning if we really understand what it says. So let's just look today. Jezreel today. Christians who do not honor God become poor and infertile. Now, of course, you have to... I don't know where your mind goes, but if I was sitting in the pew and a preacher was saying this, my mind would immediately go to, are they really Christians? That's where my mind would go. So if someone says they're a Christian, but they're not honoring God, they're not living right, they don't have a love relationship with Him, then your mind automatically goes, are they even saved? Are they even a Christian? I think that's a good question. I think it's a legitimate question. Can we truly be Christians and not honoring God? Can we truly be Christians and not have that love relationship with Him? We're just keeping rules. We're performing rituals. It's very much just a religion. But again, maybe you can't be a Christian and do that, but is it not true that for decades now in America, that's what Christianity looked like? Was keeping rules, doing the rituals, and being an outward religion, and not having that deep personal relationship with God. And those kind of whether they're false professors or they're backslidden Christians or whatever we want to label them, or maybe a combination of both, God's not going to give them great spiritual fruit. Are we in agreement on that? God's not going to sow great fruit into their lives because they're not in that relationship they're supposed to be with Him. Churches that depart from God do not bear fruit. There's so many churches today. Let's just look at a few of the ways we depart from God. But there are so many churches that neglect the Bible. There's a lot of churches that they're all about the worship. They're all about the feeling, they're all about this and that, but they're not interested in studying the Word. That is very, very common today. There are churches who they don't obey the Word. They just the church doesn't stand for doctrine. The church doesn't stand for what's right and wrong. The church won't talk about certain sins. The church people don't try to obey the Bible. It's never preached about sin, and that is very common in our churches. And then there, as we've already said, there's a lot of churches, we would probably call them more the conservative churches. There's just outward appearance. It's not that love relationship. It is, we look right, we do right, we check all the boxes, but we're not in that love relationship with God. And I think I think the lesson that I got from studying this is, if we want the spiritual blessings today, we're going to have to enter into a love relationship with God as a church and as individuals. And I may be losing you all in all the definitions of the words and such, but I hope that you're seeing the point here that our blessings come from being close to God. So God sows into churches and Christians that take God as issue. So when we as Christians, or we as churches have that relationship with God, we see blessings and supernatural spiritual blessings. So here's kind of what got me to thinking. Again, God sows. We don't see God sow. And then when He does sow, it takes a while for the harvest to come up. And so the thought that goes to my mind is, at Sandhill Church, what's God been sowing? Has God been planting seeds, and has God been putting things out there, but we can't see it, and it hasn't yet come to pass? I believe it is. I believe it is, and I believe every once in a while we get a little glimpse of, God drawing people into the church and people getting saved, and just so many different things that have happened just even over the last year, just multiple things that have happened. You get to see God is doing the supernatural. And that is God doing it. And so I personally, and I know I'm the pastor, but I personally look for these things. I have since I've been pastoring. But it scares me when we go a while and we don't see something happen that is evidence that God's doing something. Does that make sense to anybody? someone comes into church, someone is interested in salvation, life is being changed, something God just does something, you say the only guy could have done that. It wasn't the church, it wasn't somebody else, it was only God could do that. And I worry when those things aren't happening, because I just believe if we're in that love relationship, he will be sowing seeds and he will be bringing forth harvest in the church. So Jezreel, the silent working of God, we don't see the sowing. So again, God's doing a work, and we don't always see it happening. Only God can do the sowing. And this is kind of what I'd really like to try to understand. We can build a church, right? We can build a church. We can draw a great crowd. I'm very confident with the people that we have here, with all the things that we have already done, just our experience, our time. I am very confident we could fill this church up 3 times over. I have no doubt about that. We could raise a lot of money. We could do all kinds of things. I've been around church long enough to know I know how to do those things. Like I know how to get people hyped up and excited. I know how to pump people for money. I know how to draw a big crowd. But all of those things leave God out. It's what man. Are we seeing the difference? Are we seeing the difference in when if we all got together and said what kind of a gimmick can we come up with to get people to come to church, and we fill the church up? That's cool, but that's not God filling the church up. But only God can supernaturally work in people's hearts and draw them to Him, change their hearts, make them different people, do the impossible things. And I think that's what church is supposed to be, is the sowing of the seed that we can't see, and the doing the things that man cannot do. So again, we see man sowing versus God sowing. Man can do a lot of impressive things. We could do a lot of impressive things. But that's not what God's looking for. That's not what God is looking for. He's not looking to see how talented we are. He's looking for us to fall down and say, we can't do this without you. We need you, and only you can build the church. Only you can save souls. Only you can change lives. Only you can draw people in. Only you can fix homes. Only you can, all of the things that only God can do. That's what church is supposed to be. Yeah, I was thinking the charismatic churches and all that, they love to come to church every time and see some miracle happen. Someone can't walk and they get up and start walking, or some great big miracle, and that makes for an exciting show, I guess. But I think that is what people think when we say God doing a miracle. But I think so much of the time that is not God doing a miracle at all. But I wonder if we really understand the miracles God does. What's God's most interested in? He's interested in souls. That's what He's interested in. And for God to reach down and get a hold of people that maybe they don't even go to church, get a hold of people who are far away from God, get a hold of people who have interest in God, and to get a hold of them and pull them to Him, that is exciting. That, to me, that is a greater miracle, far greater miracle than a lot of the hocus pocus you see on the charismatic churches. So Israel desperately needs crops, but they could not make the crops grow. And so that was the situation in the Old Testament, that they were in a need for God to move, and only God could do it, and they had to get in a relationship with Him to have that to happen. Churches desperately need real harvest, but cannot cause the harvest. And so, again, I think that what we need at Sandhill, we cannot do. Do you guys accept that? We can't do it. We can't make LifeWise happen. We can't save kids in the schoolroom. We can't go with those boxes all over I don't know about you guys, but every one of those boxes I was praying was, I pray the Holy Spirit go with this box, and when they get it, let them hear the gospel, let them be saved, and their family be saved, and their community be saved. We can't do that. But God can. But God can. All of the things that we do, if we're doing it right, they fully depend on God to make it happen. And if we don't depend on God, I think we fall back into Baali instead of Ishi, and we're not what we're supposed to be as a church. So I don't know if any of that made sense, but I'll just end it with this. Will we take serious seeking Jezreel? Will we take it serious at Sandhill, wanting God not to scatter us, but to sow seed, to do the impossible, to do the miracle from having a relationship with Him? So I hope you got something out of that. I hope that made some sense to you. It was fascinating to study, but it was a little more difficult to